She thought it was a secret, a hidden love, just next door. But secrets have a way of coming out, and this one ended in blood. Welcome to today's chilling true crime story, a tale of passion, betrayal, and a deadly obsession. A lonely housewife, a forbidden affair with her neighbor's young son, and a discovery that led to a brutal murder. What really happened behind closed doors? Who uncovered the shocking truth? And how did a love affair turn into a crime scene? Stay with us as we unravel the shocking details of this tragic case. Twists, lies, and the final moment that changed everything. You won't believe how it all unfolded. Before we talk about the shocking crime, let's take a step back and understand the people at the center of this tragic story. Meet Lisa Carter, a 38-year-old housewife, married for over a decade to her husband, Richard. To the outside world, Lisa had a perfect life, a stable home, a devoted husband, and 2 children who adored her. But behind the walls of their suburban house, things were different. Her marriage had lost its warmth, the conversations had turned cold, and the spark that once existed had faded into routine. Richard, a hard-working businessman, was often away, leaving Lisa alone for long hours. She spent most of her days managing the household, running errands, and trying to fill the emptiness creeping into her life. And then there was Jake Miller, the 19-year-old son of the Carters' next-door neighbors. Jake had just graduated high school and was figuring out what to do next. He wasn't the kind of kid who stood out quiet, polite, and always eager to help. His mother, a single parent, worked long shifts, so Jake often took care of things at home. He would mow the lawn, fix small things around the house, and sometimes even run errands for the neighbors, including Lisa. Over time, their interactions became more frequent, harmless at first, just small talk over coffee or casual conversations while Jake helped with groceries. Script: the affair begins. Before anyone noticed, before the whisper started, it was just 2 people filling the emptiness in their lives. At first, Lisa and Jake's interactions were innocent. A friendly chat when he helped carry her groceries. A casual smile when they passed each other in the driveway. But something unspoken lingered in the air, an attraction neither of them admitted, but both felt. Lisa had spent years in a marriage that felt more like a routine than a relationship. Richard was always working, always tired, always distracted. The affection she once had was now replaced by lonely evenings and silent dinners. And then there was Jake, a young man full of energy, always attentive, always there. It started with small things. Lisa would offer him a cold drink on a hot day. She would ask him to fix little things around the house, lingering a little longer in conversation each time. Jake, eager for attention and flattered by Lisa's charm, started looking forward to their moments together. Then the boundaries blurred. One evening, during a summer storm, Jake came over to help Lisa secure the patio furniture. Rain poured outside as they laughed over a shared joke. A flash of lightning lit up the room, and in that brief moment, something shifted. A glance lasted too long. A touch lingered. A line was crossed. From that night on, everything changed. Their stolen moments became more frequent. Late-night texts, secret meetings, and excuses to see each other. Lisa felt alive again, caught in the thrill of something forbidden. Jake, young and impressionable, was intoxicated by the attention of an older woman. What they had wasn't love. It was an escape, a rush, a dangerous game they thought no one would ever notice. But in a quiet neighborhood, secrets don't stay hidden for long. And every affair has a breaking point. But something changed. The neighborhood where they lived was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. A quiet, middle-class suburban area filled with families, retirees, and young couples starting their lives. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, and weekend barbecues were a common sight. It was the kind of community where people waved at each other in the morning and shared small talk at the local grocery store. A safe, peaceful place. Until it wasn't. It was the early 2000s, a time before social media exposed every detail of people's lives. Affairs could stay hidden longer, and secrets were easier to keep. But in a small neighborhood like this, whispers spread quickly, and nothing stayed buried forever. Lisa and Jake's worlds should never have collided the way they did. One was a married woman, longing for something more. The other, a young man, caught in the rush of something he didn't fully understand. What started as innocent friendship soon turned into stolen moments, hidden glances, and late-night conversations. No one could have imagined that what began as an escape would soon spiral into something dark and irreversible. At first, Lisa and Jake were careful. They kept their distance in public, exchanged only brief glances, and avoided any behavior that could raise suspicion. But as their passion grew, so did their recklessness. Lisa started finding excuses to see Jake more often. She would send her kids to stay with their grandparents for the weekend or claim she was running errands just to sneak away. Jake, too, became bolder. He would linger around Lisa's house when her husband was away, sometimes even slipping inside for a few stolen hours. The thrill of secrecy made it all the more intoxicating, but they weren't as invisible as they thought. Neighbors started noticing small things. Lisa laughing a little too much when Jake was around, Jake spending more time at her house than seemed normal. A few raised eyebrows turned into hushed whispers. But the most dangerous sign was Lisa herself. She changed. She started dressing differently, paying more attention to her looks, wearing perfume even when she wasn't going out. She seemed happier, more alive. But with that excitement came carelessness. She stopped noticing how often she mentioned Jake in casual conversations. She didn't realize how obvious their lingering glances had become. And Richard, her husband, though often distracted, wasn't blind. One evening, he came home earlier than expected. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed something strange. Jake's bike parked around the corner, out of sight from most neighbors, but visible to him. His heart pounded as he stepped inside, calling Lisa's name. The house was too quiet. A door upstairs creaked shut. Doubt turned into suspicion, and suspicion would soon turn into something far worse. The affair had gone too far, and the walls were starting to close in. Secrets can stay hidden for a while, but they always find a way to the surface. Richard wasn't a suspicious man by nature, but something about Lisa had changed. She was distracted, lost in thought, always checking her phone. She had become distant, and when he tried to reach for her, she pulled away. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way she suddenly cared too much about how she looked, it all started adding up. Then one evening, he decided to test his gut feeling. Richard told Lisa he had an important business meeting out of town. He left home in the morning, kissed her goodbye, and drove off. But instead of heading to the airport, he parked his car a few blocks away and waited. Hours passed. He watched the house. And then, just as the sun began to set, he saw it. Jake, casually walking up to the front door, glancing around before stepping inside. Richard's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He had been right all along. Fueled by rage and betrayal, he stormed back to the house, his footsteps heavy, his heart pounding. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. And there they were. Lisa, frozen in shock, her face pale. Jake, standing too close, his eyes wide with fear. The room was filled with silence, thick and suffocating. Richard's voice broke it like a thunderclap. "What the hell is going on here?" Lisa tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Jake took a step back, realizing too late that there was nowhere to run. Richard's fists clenched at his sides, his entire body shaking. The betrayal hit him like a knife to the gut. His wife, the kid next door, in his own home. Then, something inside him snapped. Anger took over. Logic disappeared. And in that moment, the night took a dark and irreversible turn. No one knows exactly what happened in those final moments, except for the 3 people in that room. But by the time the night was over, only 2 would be left standing. Richard saw red. Years of marriage, trust, and love, all shattered in an instant. His wife, a boy young enough to be her son, in his house, in his bed. The betrayal burned through him like fire, and before he could think, he lunged at Jake. Jake panicked. He tried to move, to escape, but Richard was stronger. His fist connected with Jake's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Lisa screamed, begging them to stop, but the rage had taken over. Richard grabbed whatever he could, a lamp, a chair. It didn't matter. He swung wildly, knocking Jake to the ground. The boy tried to fight back, but he was no match for a man fueled by fury. Richard pinned him down, his hands tightening around Jake's throat. Panic filled Jake's eyes. He gasped, struggled, clawed at Richard's arms, but the grip only tightened. Lisa pulled at Richard, sobbing, pleading, but he wouldn't stop. He couldn't. And then, silence. Jake's body went limp. His chest stopped rising. His hands dropped to the floor. Lisa fell to her knees, shaking him, screaming his name. But it was too late. Reality crashed down on Richard like a tidal wave. His breath came in short gasps. His hands trembled as he looked down at what he had done. Jake, just a boy, now lifeless beneath him. Lisa backed away, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had wanted excitement, passion, an escape from her dull life. But she never imagined it would lead to this. A dead body, a crime that couldn't be undone, and a decision that would change everything. Richard took a step back, staring at his hands, stained with the consequences of a moment he could never take back. The night wasn't over yet, but the damage was already done. The aftermath of murder doesn't vanish with the dawn. It lingers heavy in the air, and soon the law comes knocking. When Richard finally snapped back to reality, the reality of his actions weighed down on him. The house was silent, except for Lisa's sobs and the distant ringing of a phone. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. He couldn't leave Jake's body there, but he couldn't stay either. Before he could make a decision, Lisa did the one thing he feared most. She called the police. The phone call was brief, but it was enough. A woman's voice, frantic and broken, telling the dispatcher that her husband had killed someone. Within minutes, sirens echoed down the quiet suburban streets. The neighbors, unaware of the violence behind closed doors, were startled by the flashing lights. A police car pulled into the driveway, followed by an ambulance. Officers rushed inside. Richard stood frozen, eyes wide, his hands trembling. The scene inside the house spoke for itself. The struggle, the broken furniture, the bloodstains. And there, in the middle of it all, was Jake, lifeless, pale, a victim of a crime that had gone too far. Detectives quickly took control of the situation. They questioned Richard first, his hands still covered in blood. Lisa, shaken and confused, was taken aside for questioning. She could hardly speak through her tears, but her story matched Richard's, at least the parts he had shared. But there were cracks, details that didn't add up. Richard's story seemed a little too rehearsed, too quick to explain away everything. The detectives weren't convinced. They found traces of defensive wounds on Jake's body, signs that he had tried to fight back. The bruises on Richard's hands told a different story than the one he had offered. It didn't take long before the evidence pointed to murder, not just self-defense. Richard was arrested on the spot, charged with the killing of Jake Miller. The police continued to investigate, piecing together the timeline of events. They dug into Lisa's phone records, confirming the affair that had been hidden for so long. The relationship between Lisa and Jake wasn't just a secret, it was a ticking time bomb. As news of the crime spread, the small, peaceful neighborhood was rocked to its core. People who had known Lisa and Richard for years couldn't believe what had happened. How could a seemingly perfect family fall apart so violently? How could a boy who was once just a neighbor end up murdered in their home? The investigation revealed one harsh truth. No one could truly escape the consequences of their actions. And now Lisa and Richard would have to face theirs. The arrest was only the beginning. Now came the public trial, where every detail of the crime would be laid bare for the world to see. Richard stood in the courtroom, his eyes vacant, his face ashen. The gravity of what he had done was now undeniable. He had taken a life, a young life, full of potential, during a moment of rage and jealousy. Lisa, once the center of the attention, was now relegated to a quieter, more broken figure. She was not the one on trial, but her involvement in the affair, in the chain of events leading up to the murder, couldn't be ignored. The prosecution painted a clear picture of premeditation and uncontrollable anger. They detailed how Richard had snapped after discovering the affair, recounting the violent confrontation and the brutal way Jake had been killed. The evidence was damning. Jake's defensive wounds, the bloodied scene, and the sheer force of Richard's actions suggested a murder fueled by more than just a moment of panic. Lisa's testimony was both a defense and a confession. She admitted to the affair, her voice breaking with guilt and remorse as she described how her marriage had deteriorated and how she had sought solace in Jake. But even as she spoke, the prosecution argued that her choices, her actions, had helped ignite the tragic events that followed. The defense tried to argue that Richard had acted in the heat of the moment, that he had been overwhelmed by the shock of betrayal and acted in self-defense after being threatened. But the jury wasn't convinced. The trial dragged on for weeks, with both sides presenting their cases. It became clear that Lisa's actions, though not directly responsible for Jake's death, played a pivotal role in the chain of events. Some speculated that Richard's actions were partly fueled by the humiliation of his wife's affair, the sense of betrayal that overwhelmed him in the heat of the moment. After a tense deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Richard Carter was found guilty of second-degree murder. The charges of manslaughter didn't hold up. His violent actions, fueled by rage and jealousy, could not be classified as a momentary lapse of judgment. The judge sentenced Richard to 25 years in prison, a sentence that would see him pay for the life he had taken. Lisa, too, faced consequences. While she was not charged with murder, her role in the affair and the way it led to the tragedy did not go unnoticed. She was emotionally shattered, her family broken, and the weight of her own choices would haunt her for the rest of her life. She would live with the knowledge that her affair, though not directly responsible for the murder, had contributed to the chain of events that ended in death. For the Miller family, there was no justice that could bring their son back. The trial offered little comfort, only the harsh reality that a young man's life had been stolen because of a lie, a betrayal, and an act of violence. The community, too, would never be the same. The quiet, peaceful neighborhood would carry the scars of that fateful night forever. And as the gavel came down, the final chapter of this heartbreaking story was written. But the consequences of that night would ripple through the lives of everyone involved, forever changing them. The impact of the crime didn't end with the trial. For the families involved, the ripples of that fateful night would be felt for years to come. Lisa's life was shattered beyond repair. Her marriage was over. Richard, now behind bars, could never come back to the family they once had. Her children, too young to fully understand the complexity of what had happened, would grow up with the heavy burden of knowing their father had killed a young man. Lisa faced the unrelenting judgment of her community. Neighbors, friends, and even family members turned their backs on her. The affair had destroyed not just her marriage, but her entire life. As for Jake's family, the loss was unimaginable. His mother, already a single parent, had to bury her son, the boy she had raised, the boy who had been kind, helpful, and full of life. The tragedy of Jake's death cast a shadow over her every day. No amount of justice or legal proceedings could bring him back. The grief would never leave her. The small suburban neighborhood that once felt like a safe haven now felt haunted. People who had known both families for years walked past their homes with whispers, remembering the quiet, friendly neighbors who now stood as symbols of something darker. The news cameras had long gone, but the community's scars remained. Trust had been shattered. What was once a place where children played in the streets now felt like a place where secrets hid behind every door. For the police, the case remained a sobering reminder of how deep human emotions could run, how love, jealousy, and betrayal could push someone to commit the unthinkable. The investigation had been long and grueling, but the result was clear. A young man was dead, and a family was forever torn apart. In the years that followed, Lisa's life continued in a different direction. She tried to rebuild herself, but the stain of her choices would never fully wash away. She sought therapy, attended support groups, and eventually moved to another part of the country to start over. She lived in the shadow of her past, knowing she could never fully outrun the consequences. For Richard, his life behind bars was a slow march to atonement. His rage, his decisions, had led to the ultimate loss, the death of an innocent young man. He tried to find peace, but the memories of that night would forever haunt him. He would never be able to undo the damage he had caused, no matter how many years he served in prison. And for the community, the aftermath of that tragic night remained an open wound, one that would take time to heal, if it ever could. The affair, the murder, and the lives lost were not just a cautionary tale, but a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous actions arise from the seemingly mundane struggles and desires of everyday life. This tragic story serves as a heartbreaking reminder of how a single mistake, an affair, a moment of passion, can unravel lives in ways that no one expects. Lisa's search for excitement, Richard's inability to control his rage, and Jake's misguided involvement all led to a senseless loss. A young life was taken, and a family was left in pieces. The consequences of their actions were far-reaching, affecting not only them, but their entire community. No one came out unscathed. Every decision, every choice, set off a chain of events that no one could undo. Affairs, secrets, and lies may seem harmless at first, but as this story shows, they can lead to devastating results. The emotional, psychological, and in this case, physical toll is far too high. So as you reflect on this tragic case, let it serve as a cautionary tale. Be mindful of the choices you make, the relationships you engage in, and the power of your actions. What starts as something small can quickly spiral into something irreversible. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more true crime cases and chilling stories. Stay aware, stay informed, and remember, every action has consequences.